or perhaps just in terms of non-conforming structures that are over a certain age. Another option, of course, would be to do nothing and leave it the way it is. And this individual couldn't get a building permit for the current design that she's proposing. So staff thought it would be wise to bring it to the Planning Commission and so we see what kind of preference you might have.
So let me ask, I have a couple of questions, but I'd rather not go first. Do any of the other commissioners have questions of Gary or comments?
Yeah, I do. This is Marissa. Buildings typically need to be 10 feet apart for fire code reasons. And when you have that roof overhang, you know, that typically is allowed to encroach into the setbacks by, I think it's like 2 feet. Don't quote me on that. So if you have that 2 feet of that roof on one side and 2 feet encroachment on the other side, that gives you that 10 foot of fire separation between two buildings. And I think that's why they moved it to the 7 feet, which makes sense to me going from a fire safety standpoint.
I thought the fire code was 5 feet.
It is 5 feet, but when you have 5 feet from each building, as far as how I've always understood it. So if one building is 5 feet from the property line, you typically want to have 10 feet between buildings unless you make them fire rated walls. That's how I've always known it to be.
Oh, I thought it was you could be less than 5 feet if you did construct your walls as being fireproof.
Yes, you can if your walls are fireproof, right? Fireproof, fire rated.
So in this case, I don't frankly know whether the roof overhang encroaches any further. I was led to believe that the total amount of the structure was 6 feet from the property line, and that includes the roof overhang.
Oh, okay.
If Henry's on the line, maybe he can correct me, but that was
Harry, and I do not know what the roof overhang is. I know that the structure encroaches 1 to 2 feet into the 7 foot side yard setback.
okay. Well, I think that's a good point, because if there is additional roof overhang, then we have to take that into account.
Yeah, and roof overhangs typically are an easy way for fire to enter a building, typically through those softer vents by either the embers or whatever.
Right.
So that's just my thought on that.
On that point, and I agree that the fire code and fire safety needs to be a primary consideration here. On that point, if there were proposed either revisions or an administrative variance that language was drafted for, could we have the fire district weigh in on their view of the language or the proposed revision?
I would certainly recommend that. In this case, it would take a 15% administrative variance to give them enough space.
Do other commissioners have a question?
No, I don't, Paul. I don't see any reason to really change it myself and leave it alone at 7 feet and then allow the variance to go into 1 or 2 feet, like Marissa was saying. So there must have been some thought put into it originally.
Well, right now, if we leave things the way they are, the property owner cannot do the addition, at least the way it's been designed.
That's right. She would have to revise it, which I believe is possible. It would create kind of an awkward look.
So, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't know whether it's a historically protected structure either.
Right, that's a good point, Gary.
And then without seeing the building and how the roof would form, if it was my house, you not knowing what's going on the other side of the property line too, make that one wall, have it be 1 hour fire rated, have it be a rated wall. I mean, all they do is just add another layer of drywall to it, and that creates a firewall.
I guess I should bring up one of the reasons we brought this to Planning Commission is because we feel this is likely to come up again with other older homes in Coburg. So I think any potential remedy should be applied not to just this home, but throughout Coburg to a certain point.
So are you thinking that every time we have this type of situation arise, that we need to get the fire department okay, or suggestions from the fire department of how to get it so it would be okay for them? Because that's basically what I'm hearing is the primary reason for the side yard setback is fire.
No, I think the issue is, if we're thinking of relaxing the setbacks legislatively, changing the code, we should include the fire department in the discussion. And if they agree that it could be done and give us some ideas of how it can safely be done, that could be built into the changes to the code. It wouldn't be on a case-by-case basis.
To me, that
Why
seems like the
couldn't
best
it be,
solution.
though? Why couldn't it be on a case-by-case basis?
Well, you'd have to have a set of standards that you would apply uniformly on a case-by-case basis. It's a lot easier administering just a standard that's set out in the code. If the building and the fire department could say, yeah, you could relax the standard if you require A, B, and C to the structure that's in the setback, that would probably address all future issues.
Gary, I think part of that issue is that if we did nothing, we can't allow this property to do what it wants, even if the fire district weighed in and said it was okay. We need some change, and then if necessary, in any individual future case, the fire district may have to weigh in, but we'd like to do a change now, is what I'm hearing, that would not require the fire district to weigh in every time.
How would you change it? What would you change?
You would
Maybe
have
the
to
question
change.
is how would you change it if it's fire that's the biggest concern? How can the city make some determination how we're going to change this code setback requirement?
What you would do is change the development code to allow the encroachment to 5 feet or 6 feet from the property line. Maybe restrict that just to current non-conforming structures. And then, as a matter of the standards, you could put in the code the fire retardant things that you would have to do in order to get that administrative variance, for instance.
And that would take care of it under most cases and preclude the fire district having to weigh in on every case.
Right.
Gary, the administrative variance example from Oak Ridge was 10%. Is there any reason that I know that's just an example, but is there any reason that you would feel uncomfortable if our variance was something different than that? I think you mentioned, again, we're not trying to address only one case, but I think you mentioned that for the case that's before us now, or before the city now, it would require a 15% variance.
That's correct. Again, if you're thinking of doing an administrative variance, you could certainly limit it to a certain class of structures. You could limit it to non-conforming residences in the traditional residential district. And that would be the extent of the exception to the setback, side yard setbacks.
In other words, in some sense, although I don't think this is the language that would be used, but in some sense, you would be grandfathering in those properties that were built under the old 5-foot setback.
Correct. And again, you could integrate, in order to get that administrative variance, the new addition, whatever you did, would have to have special fire retardant concerns, which we would put in the code at the recommendation of the fire department.
So I know on the agenda, Gary, and maybe Ann and Sammy also, but I know, Gary, that on the agenda, this was listed as discussion only, but at the start of your memo, it did say, it did list question. And the question was, should the city address this? And I think my sense of what you might want from the commission tonight in this work session is not necessarily telling you as staff to pursue one of these 3 options in your memo, but whether or not to pursue an option to address this at all, a yes or no in general, and then based on what you're hearing tonight, you might come back with the administrative variance and additional fire protection language. Is that correct?
That's correct. We don't want to pursue any solution without the Planning Commission's direction.
So given what I just said, do the other planning commissioners feel comfortable directing staff to pursue bringing back to us a solution, most likely an administrative variance solution with built-in fire protections, but that may not be what they bring back after further research. But again, I'm asking the other commissioners, are we okay telling staff to pursue a solution, or do we want to just leave things as is?
I think I'm okay with the directing staff to do that. My reluctance is that the city getting involved and trying to write something up on the fire issues. Like, granted, the fire department can give us input, but then to put it in code, then it seems like over time things might change. And so we're just might be better off to, if there's administrative variance like this, to get the fire department involved, I think each time, but that's just my opinion. And instead of trying to get the city to write into code some sort of fire protection measures that may be out of date or could be changed.
But my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Gary, my understanding is there's no way to get the fire district involved now because there's nothing in the existing code that would allow the fire district to approve something different without us putting into place a new administrative variance.
That's
Agreed.
correct.
Agreed.
So the other
What
commissioner,
I'm not really interested in is trying to figure out how, or have the staff, direct staff to come up with some sort of language in our development code that would satisfy every case. You see what I'm saying? In other words, each case might be different in regards to how they could come up with fire protection for this particular variance.
Well, the building code has, I assume, a lot of solutions for this issue, a lot of options that you can choose to create a fire retardant surface. And And I think the fire department often relies on those standards when they're making recommendations. And of course, the building code changes over time.
Other commissioners, is there a sense of your go, no go on directing staff to come back with potential changes or to leave as is?
Paul and Heath has her hand up.
I'm sorry. Anne, go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to say was you can direct staff to bring this back with potential changes. The other option is, and there is one other option, to the council will form an ad hoc committee to look at development code changes in January. So at their January 12th meeting, the other option could be that you direct staff or provide some form of a information to push this topic to the ad hoc committee to look at while they are looking at the development code. That's all I wanted to share.
And that sort of raises the question, since I guess I'm going to be part of that ad hoc committee, is I've been wondering, you don't have to answer now, but I've been wondering how the list of potential changes or things that need to be looked at by that ad hoc committee is going to be pulled together. And so however that's done, again, you don't have to answer, however that's done, you're saying that tonight the planning commission could essentially say, we'd like to hand this off to that ad hoc committee.
Yeah, I mean, that was, when I was thinking about this, that was one of the options that you could think about, just simply because changing development code, I mean, if we're going to do it, then maybe it's a good idea to do it all at once. It doesn't solve this particular homeowner's problem, but just to reiterate what Henry had said is that we anticipate that we're going to see more of this as these homes in that district start to change hands. And so it would be good if we could try to address it. And yeah, how that ad hoc committee comes up with what they're going to address, I think will be to consider what were the things that came up at the survey and the report on the build out, but then there will be a chance to add in anything else that I think is related, and I think this is related. So if that helps.
No, that does help. Thank you, Anne, because I think part of what's happened to the code or created the need for that committee over time is one-off changes to it that maybe have unintended consequences or, domino effects. And we wouldn't want this one, although I'm not sure I see where it would, but we wouldn't want this one if it was done as a one-off thing to create some other unintended consequence. Setbacks are a fairly major part of the code, though, so maybe it could create some other unintended impact. I like the idea of handing it off to the ad hoc committee, but I also want to be sensitive to the current property owner. And I don't know, Henry, if you would be the one to say if that current property owner has any time-sensitive desire for perhaps a resolution or could wait for the ad hoc committee to look at it.
Yeah, Paul. So I did let her know that Planning Commission was going to look at this at a work session, and I briefly outlined like some possible ways that it could be resolved, and they all were not any time soon. So she's aware that if anything is going to happen, it's going to take a while, and she has not responded back to me yet. But as it stands right now, her building permit is still pending. And hasn't really been processed forward because of this issue. But she is aware. She did respond that, you know, if she absolutely has to, she can revise her addition to make that new structure conforming. Like I said, it would kind of make for an awkward home and some unusable space, is what she had told me.
So again, other commissioners, Marissa and others, do you have a sense of moving forward with no change, moving forward with asking the staff to bring us a change now, or passing this off to the ad hoc committee?
Well, the ad hoc committee sounds good approach to me. Maybe get some more further discussion on it, so I'm good with that.
Thank you, John. Others, though? I mean, I'd love to hear from the other commissioners on the line.
This is Seth speaking. I'm going to buck the trend here. I really don't think we should change the development code. Partly due to the fire restrictions and concerns about that. More specifically, though, I think that 85-year-old houses have a certain charm, and they're built a certain way, and I think they need to kind of stay that way. And this is one way to make sure that happens.
I like the point that Seth makes with the older homes have that certain type of charm that they should stay that way, but that at the same time, the way people live in their houses have changed. And so I understand for the need to, adjust the living, the way that people are living in the current house configurations. But I don't think that should be done with jeopardizing the safety of the occupants. And I think it can be looked at by, someone that's that can look at this, and then at the same time, I'm okay with it staying the way it is. I don't know. I'm kind of torn. I don't know if that helps. Doesn't help.
No, it's good to hear. No, it's good to hear, and it's interesting, Seth, because I understand what you're saying, but Henry, am I hearing that if this variance is not allowed for the current older property, she would move forward with another option that would not only be awkward, but might be, less consistent with the older nature of the house. And indeed, in this case, the variance might make it more consistent with maintaining the character of the house?
That's just what she had told me in email. That the designer did come out and remeasure the setbacks, and yes, they were still non-conforming. And the designers made it sound like they could make it work, but they would rather not. I have not seen any revised plans. That's all I can comment on in regards to that.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know how it would play out in any individual case, but I guess I could see a catch-22 where not allowing any variances could force an owner of an older home to do some sort of solution or construction that would be more detrimental to the nature of the older home than if they were allowed the variance.
Sure, I see that argument, Paul. Yep.
I do think that's a good point, Paul. And that's definitely another way to think of it, or something to be concerned about. I honestly don't know. But I'd be hesitant to change code based on this instant, because I think there might be ramifications that we're just not thinking about at the moment.
Given that, and Seth, I think that's a really good point, given that, and the fact that changing code on just this one example brought to us, I think I'm sort of leaning towards proposing that we pass this off to the ad hoc committee, which can consider it along with other code changes and would eventually make its way back to us if there was going to be any change.
Sure. I'm on that committee too, I think.
Yeah, I think
So,
it's you and I, Marissa.
yeah. I'm okay with
Are
that.
the other are all the other commissioners okay with passing it off to the ad hoc committee?
I'm okay
I
with
am.
that.
John, I think you already weighed in that you're okay with the ad hoc looking at this. William, are you okay with that?
I am very okay with that.
I think that might wrap this up, Gary. And Gary, Henry, Ann, is that a good enough solution for tonight?
Sure.
Yes, thank you, Paul, and everybody else.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that we would just pass Gary's memo that he wrote. Somehow we record it and make sure that when that committee starts, that they get that same memo that you got. So that so they have that same information.
Okay. Well, given that, I guess according to the agenda, I'm supposed to formally adjourn the work session. So unless there is something else that needs to be said, I will adjourn the work session and we will reconvene in the Planning Commission meeting at 7 o'clock.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
So we're getting really close to 7 o'clock. This is Sammy. I want to ask all of our planning commissioners to please turn their cameras on if they have that ability. Then I'll have a few more announcements and as we get before Paul opens the meeting. Okay, so it looks like it's 7 o'clock. I just wanted to remind everybody that this meeting is being held via webinar. It's being recorded and also streamed live. Presenters and the members of the public, we ask that you mute your microphones and shut off your cameras at this time. When it's your turn, you will be called on to provide testimony. Please unmute yourself and you may turn your camera on. During the public comment portion of the meeting, participants may raise their hand virtually. We have a couple people on here that are hosting, and we will get that information to the chair to address you. If for some reason that this meeting's interrupted by a possible power outage, it was pretty windy out there today, or for any other reason, because of the public hearing, we will continue this meeting tomorrow night at 7 p.m. And I think I'm going to turn it over to you, Paul, to kick it off. Oops, you'll need to unmute, Paul. There you go.
How's that?
That's better.
I unmuted my phone, but not my Zoom. Okay. So welcome everybody. I'm going to call the December 16th meeting of the Coburg Planning Commission to order at 7:01 p.m. And according to the agenda, Anne, you will be doing the roll call.
I could do that. I see Chair Paul Thompson, Commissioner John Marshall, Commissioner Marissa Doyle, Commissioner Seth Clark, Commissioner William Wood. Am I missing? And I believe that Commissioner Bainey is absent. And am I missing anyone else?
Commissioner Derby.
Commissioner Derby is absent. We do have a quorum.
Thank you, Anne. Next on the agenda would be agenda review. And as far as I know, and I've asked staff, there are no modifications to the agenda, but Sammy, can you confirm that?
That's correct. There's no changes to the agenda.
Okay, so we'll keep moving. Next up before us, we have approval of minutes. We have two sets of minutes from October 27th and November 18th of this year. The minutes were in your packet, and I actually only had one minor question on them, but does anybody have any other comments or questions to the two sets of minutes? Hearing none, I'm going to just, my one question, which is getting a little bit picky, but I noticed on the November 18th, Henry, you're listed as LCOG Associate Planner, and on October 27th, you're listed as Geographic Information Systems Technician, and it almost makes it sound like you're part of the city of Coburg. I actually think the former one, the planner title, is the appropriate one for the minutes, correct?
Yes, Paul.
Okay, so again, just trying to get that clear that in both cases he was the associate planner from LCOG. Given that minor modification, is there a motion to approve the two sets of minutes?
Hi, this is Chair Wood. Or not Chair, I apologize. Commissioner Wood, I move to accept the minutes.
Thank you. A second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Commissioner Wood moved and Commissioner Clark seconded to accept the 2 sets of minutes. All in favor, say aye or raise your hand, or otherwise let me know.
Aye.
Thank
Wood,
you.
aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Any opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are accepted.
Paul, can you clarify Commissioner Marshall's vote on that? I missed it.
I'm sorry.
John,
Commissioner Marshall,
Yeah.
Commissioner Marshall did say aye, I believe, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
So that was a unanimous vote. So next is public testimony. Sammy, I believe you have a list of at least one person who wants to testify during the general public testimony.
Yeah, I do not have anyone signed up under general testimony tonight.
Okay. Then we're good to move past that one unless there is somebody that wishes to speak from those attending the meeting. All right, hearing none, I'm going to keep us moving right along to agenda item number 6, which is commission business, public hearing, and consider approval of variance -01-20, Suzuki variance. Excuse me while I try and juggle a couple of screens and a bunch of piles of paper here. But my understanding this evening is that the Planning Commission will be holding a public hearing on variance file number VAR-01-20. There will be an opportunity to provide public testimony or to submit written comments. The hearings will be recorded and held in accordance with the land use procedures required by Development Code and state law. The notice of this variance was mailed to nearby property owners pursuant to the Development Code. After the planning staff presents a staff report, there will be an opportunity to be heard. The procedure allows proponents and opponents of the proposal an opportunity to present and rebut evidence. And before the close of the hearing, anyone may request that the record be held open an additional 7 days to allow more time to submit testimony. There may also be a request for a continuance if there is new evidence submitted during the public hearing. So I'm going to ask if that is sufficient to move us right along to Henry's staff report on this before I open the public hearing.
Yeah, that sounds good to me, Paul.
It's yours, Henry.
Oh, thank you, Paul. Okay, tonight you have a variance request in front of you for Mr. Kurt Suzuki. His request is to replace a carport within the 7-foot side yard setback. Megan, can you advance the next slide, please? So tonight I'll give you a brief overview of the proposal, talk about the conditions of approval, outline some options for you, and the proposal is really straightforward. Next slide, please. This, it's not exactly how I wanted it. I'm going to walk you through it nonetheless. This is a Noctiscale graphic representation. There you go. Thank you. Of what's being requested here. I'll walk you through the image. So the big blue rectangle, would just think of that as his home. The front line is a 20-foot setback from the front property line. That is met. Also, carports have to be at least 5 feet back from the front face of the wall of the home. This is also met. Where the variance comes into play is the carport being placed within 1 foot of the property line. Also, the carport will be placed within 1 foot of the existing home of the wall. We've checked with building official and the fire. They both issued comment. They have no issues with this proposal. Next slide, please. I'm going to walk you through the findings required for approval of variances. The subject property contains circumstances which are peculiar to the land and the existing structure that was placed using old septic requirements and has a wedge-shaped property boundary within a cul-de-sac. The existing home was originally sited in 1998 under old septic requirements that took up additional space in the northern backyard area. That was required for backup septic drain field. If the home were to be sited today, the home site could be placed in a manner to allow for newer septic regulations, and they allow for adequate room to place the carport outside of the setback. The property located immediately to the west of the subject property is the same wedge-shaped size, but is 0.2 acres larger, and the septic drain field requirements depend on the standards in place at the time when a home is sited. The conditions that exist on the subject property cannot automatically be applied to other lands. The applicant's proposed carport structure will be used to protect and safeguard a recreational vehicle, or RV. A carport will allow for the applicant to protect their RV from the elements and help maintain its value, appearance, and performance. The carport and the use of a carport are property rights that neighbors currently enjoy in the vicinity. The proposed carport to be placed will be engineered and permitted through the building official. The property owners were not able to place their dwelling on the subject property in a location conducive to place a carport outside of the setback due to the required and now outdated septic drain field setbacks and the shape of the property. In their written narrative, the applicant states the carport will not cause any access or fire issues. The proposed carport will be open-sided to allow for free access. The proposed carport will be constructed with full-length gutter and downspouts. As I mentioned earlier, fire and building have both reviewed the proposal and they have no issues with it. Next slide, please. The granting of a variance to the setback to place an open-sided carport for RV storage and protection will not grant the applicant a special privilege that is denied by the code to other lands, structures, or buildings in the same district. The proposed carport will be placed behind the front-facing wall of the home and behind a gate that is adjacent to the driveway. The use of a carport is one that is routinely enjoyed by neighboring property owners in Coburg. The placement of a carport within the setback will not make a nonconformity, nor are staff aware of any existing nonconformities located on the property. As discussed in the findings above, staff have found the applicant's proposal to meet the required findings for the granting of a variance. The granting of a variance to the setback standards to place a carport within the setback would be the minimum variance required to make possible reasonable use of the property owner's land and protection and security of their RV. Next slide, please. You actually go back one, please, Megan. There should be an 8 on the bottom there. Can you zoom up? Thank you. Coburg Development Code does have other setback standards with respect to carports, and the applicant is able to meet those standards. As I stated earlier, the carport will be at least 5 feet behind the front-facing wall of the home and will be set back at least 20 feet from the front street. The carport will be engineered and custom designed in a manner that is aesthetically pleasing and fitting the harmony of the neighborhood. Furthermore, it's unlikely the carport will even be visible from the right-of-way, as the carport will be placed behind a gate. The neighbor that would most be impacted by a carport being placed within 8 inches of the property line has been informed of the applicant's request and has given written authorization of the proposed carport variance. That authorization was included in your packets, by the way. Next slide, please. Staff do recommend one condition of approval for this application. In Coburg, anything over 200 square feet requires a building permit. The carport would be approximately 490 square feet. Therefore, the applicant should be required to obtain the appropriate building permits from the building department. Next slide, please. Staff do recommend approval based on the findings, conclusions, and conditions as contained in the staff report. Planning Commission may make a motion to approve the request based on the staff report, make a motion to deny the request based off findings to be prepared for denial, In this case, Planning Commission would direct staff as to the basis for their denial decision, or Planning Commission may make a motion to approve with amended findings and/or additional conditions. Planning Commission would direct staff on what changes are to be made. That's all I have, Paul.
All right. Thank you, Henry. So I'm going to go ahead now and open the public hearing on variance -01-20. There's some things I need to read here. Public hearing is now open. State law requires decision makers to be impartial. Does any commissioner wish to make any disclosure or abstain from participating or voting on this application because either you may gain financially as a result of this application, you own property within the area entitled to receive notice of this hearing, you have a direct private interest in the proposal, or because you have determined that you cannot be impartial? Hearing nobody speaking to that, does any commissioner need to declare any contact, written or otherwise, with the applicant or any other party involved in this hearing, or any other source of outside information regarding the subject of this hearing? Again, hearing none, have any commissioners visited the site in person?
I have.
Thank you for disclosing that, Commissioner Marshall. Does anyone present have an objection as to the Coburg Planning Commission's jurisdiction or impartiality? All right, hearing none, we'd like now to hear from everyone who is interested in the proposal. Please wait until I call on you to present testimony. State your name and address for the record. In your testimony, you should address the applicable approval criteria or circumstances and state the facts around the issue. You must raise each issue with sufficient specificity to allow other parties to respond and to understand the nature of your concerns. If you do not raise an issue during the public hearing, you may not use that issue as a basis for an appeal. The applicant in this case has the burden of demonstrating by a preponderance of the evidence that the proposal should be approved, so the applicant is allowed to speak first, and it's purely optional, but I understand that we do have the applicant, Kurt Suzuki, on the line. Kurt, would you like to speak? And Sammy, can you unmute him if necessary?
Yes, unmute. So he should be able to unmute himself. Kurt, are you with us tonight?
Yes, I am.
Great. Did you have anything you'd like to add?
I do not.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That's moving on from that. All other people testifying, if any, please limit your testimony to 3 minutes. Are there any others that wish to speak? Sandy, has anybody signed up to testify on this variance?
There is nobody signed up.
And I do not see any raised hands or anybody else indicating that they wish to speak.
Nope.
Okay, so I believe that we will move on. So the next thing that I'm going to ask is, does the commission have any questions of the applicant or staff?
Yes, I do, to staff. In regards to the building permit for the structure, once it's in place, can he make modifications to it or basically rebuild it to make it enclose it without getting approval from the city?
I'm not a building permit expert, but I don't see why not. Once he goes through the building permit process and he gets the building permit and he places his carport, I don't see why he can't alter it as long as it's, I mean, not in an unsafe manner. But yeah, I don't see why he cannot.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions of the applicant or staff? Hearing none, I need to ask if the commission has any desire to continue the hearing or if I may proceed to close it at this time. And again, just going through the procedural steps here, but seeing no desire to continue the hearing, I'm going to call the public hearing for variance -01-20 closed. And does the commission wish to discuss this matter any further, or if not, I would entertain a motion for approval as presented in the staff report, subject to the findings and the one condition of approval.
I so move that we approve it with the information provided by staff.
I second.
We have a motion to approve by Commissioner Marshall, seconded by Commissioner Wood, to approve variance -01-20 as presented in the staff report with the findings and the one condition of approval. Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay. This is the easy one tonight. So
Thank you,
given
Paul.
that, I will say that the motion again is to approve variance -01-20, subject to the information in the staff report. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 And I vote aye. Are there any opposed? I count the vote as 5 in favor, no opposed, and that would be a unanimous decision to approve the variance. Again, the Planning Commission decision may be appealed to the City Council within 14 days of the date of the notice of decision being mailed, and staff will mail the notice of decision within 5 days of this decision. I think that takes care of this agenda item. Is that it, Henry?
Yes, great job, Paul. Nothing else.
Thank you. Now I'll bring the bigger stack of paper up. So we're moving on to agenda item number 7, commission business, public hearing, and consider approval of subdivision -02-20 Whitechurch subdivision. At this time, I basically need to go through all of the same details and procedures. So again, the Planning Commission will be holding a public hearing on subdivision application -02-20. You will have the opportunity to provide public testimony or to submit written comments. This hearing is being recorded and held in accordance with the land use procedures required by the Development Code and state law. Notice for this subdivision application was mailed to nearby property owners pursuant to the Development Code. After the planning staff presents a staff report, there will be a public hearing with an opportunity to be heard. The procedure will allow the proponents and opponents and those who are neutral an opportunity to present and rebut evidence. Before the close of the hearing, anyone may request that the record be held open an additional 7 days to allow for more time to submit testimony. There may also be a request for a continuance of the hearing if there is new evidence submitted during this hearing. So again, I'm going to ask if you are ready, Henry, that we have the staff report at this time.
Sure. Let me get my stuff ready here. There we go. Okay. Megan, you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so the outline tonight, some things to know up front. There's been some recent updates since the staff report was published a week ago. I'll give a brief overview of the proposal. I'll discuss the findings. I'll discuss the conditions of approval. I'll outline some Planning Commission action items. Next slide, please. So some things to know up front. It's staff's position that the subject property does contain topographic constraints. This is something Planning Commission will have to consider. The subject property is long and narrow, that prevents a minimum block length of 400 feet from occurring for the blocks containing lots 15 through 26. The subject property has constrained access that prevents the western portion from presently developing. Macy Street, located to the west, cannot punch through and connect presently due to structures and private property that lie in the way. As such, the applicant is proposing one access point into the subdivision via North Coleman and a scaled-back proposal from what was presented this past summer. Next slide, please. Recent updates. Of the several written comments that came in this afternoon, they generally oppose the use of Coleman as the entrance into the proposed subdivision and have concerns regarding the number of vehicles going in and out. Another comment speaks to the inadequacies of the development code that would allow for such development to be approved and invoke the comp plan's goals to preserve the small town character of Coburg. Also, the orderly development of streets is questioned as to what constitutes the orderly development of streets. Mrs. Teresa Bishaw, the representative for Mr. Alan Wells, Peggy Wells, and Andrew Hughes, offer several changes that can be made to the proposed subdivision in the form of additional conditions of approval. Staff have not recommended these conditions of approval in the staff report. The Planning Commission has the authority to impose additional conditions that are reasonable, clear, and objective and tied to criteria. The applicant is aware of the proposed conditions of approval proposed by Ms. Bischoff and does not oppose to them. I will outline the additional proposed conditions of approval next by Mrs. Bischoff. Next slide, please. The applicant is not opposed to the condition of approval number 10 as proposed by Ms. Bischoff. Prior to final plat approval, the applicant shall include on the final plat reserve strips at the terminus of North Skinner Street and on the north side of East Van Dunn Street, adjacent to the subdivisions. The reserve strips would remain in place until such time as further development occurs on lot 27. Next slide, please. Condition 11, applicant not opposed to, as proposed by Ms. Bischoff. Prior to final plat approval, revise sheet 4, the shadow plat, to include A, bollards shown on the extension of North Skinner Street at the intersections of Sarah Street and East Van Dyne Street, and B, label the 25-foot wide section as a future bike pedestrian easement. The applicant has seen this proposed addition and would add the wording emergency access before the word easement. That would be one minor modification if adopted. Next slide, please. 12. Prior to the final plat approval, the applicant shall provide a note that lot 27 is non-buildable area until such time as at least one additional street is available to serve the site from the east, west, or north of the property. Except for emergency vehicle access and a bike pedestrian easement, North Skinner shall not be extended to serve lot 27. If this condition is adopted by Planning Commission, staff would likely clarify that the note is meant to be a plat note that would be written on the final recorded plat. Next slide, please. 13. Prior to the final plat approval, the applicant shall submit a final plat relocating tract A to the west side of North Emerald Street adjacent to lot 27 and relocating lots 15, 16, 25, and 26 to the east side of North Emerald Street. Concurrently, the applicant shall revise sheet 4, the shadow plat, to relocate the proposed potential future park site from lot 40 to a linear strip adjacent to tract A, resulting in a single park of at least 28,305 square feet. I believe Mr. Wells and Ms. Bishaw will be presenting oral testimony tonight, so I'll leave these conditions up to them to explain and discuss with you further if required. But I would like to add, the applicant has submitted into the record an alternative layout showing the proposed conditions of approval are possible for them to attain. Staff notes the applicant may lose one lot, but that is not for certain at this time. The present proposal that you are reviewing tonight would still be 26 lots for home site development. Those two alternative layouts are presented as exhibits A and B, and Sammy emailed those to the commissioners about an hour ago or so. Staff also note that you are being tasked with reviewing the tentative plan that was included in your packets. These two alternate layouts are to show you that if the additional conditions are accepted, a subdivision is still possible on lot 27 and shows generally how the park would develop. If those conditions are implemented by Planning Commission, you can expect the final plat for lots 1 through 26 that implement those conditions. And the findings of fact and conditions of approval would be updated to reflect that. The situation regarding development on lot 27, as discussed in the staff report, remains the same. No development will occur on lot 27 if this application is approved tonight. Next slide, please. A brief overview of the proposal. Could you zoom out, please, Megan? The applicant is proposing a 26-lot subdivision for home site development. Lot 27 will be an unsubdivided remainder and will not be developed. The proposed 26 lots will be accessed by North Coleman Street and involve the creation of tracts A through C. Tract A will be deeded to the city for eventual park and open space development, and tracts B and C will be deeded to the city for stormwater infrastructure. The applicant will be completely constructing new stormwater facilities that, once completed, the city will take over long-term ownership and maintenance responsibilities of. Next slide, please. The lot standards. The majority of the subject property is zoned traditional residential, with about 0.59 acres zoned traditional medium residential. For the 26 lots proposed, all are zoned traditional residential. The applicant has shown on sheet 1 that all basic lot standards are met. All lots have at least 6,000 square feet and are at least 50 feet of lot width or 55 feet for corner lots are met. The maximum lot coverage in the zone is 40%, which can be verified upon building permit submittal. Next slide, please. The minimum density standards. In the TR zone, the minimum density standard is 60% of the max dwelling units per acre of 7.5. The code lays out in parentheses this simple calculation and calculates 60% of 7.5 is 5.4. This is a math error. When staff perform this basic calculation, 60% of 7.5 is 4.5. This is the reason why staff are using 4.5 as the minimum dwelling units per acre value. The precise calculations are provided for in the staff report. The calculations come out to a minimum of 27.7 dwelling units to meet the minimum density. It's expected that one single-family home will be placed on each of the 26 proposed lots, so they will be one dwelling unit short. However, the code allows for the minimum density standards to not apply to properties that contain access or topographic constraints. As I alluded to earlier, it's staff's position that these constraints apply to the subject property, so the minimum density standards may be relaxed in this recognition. Next slide, please. Streets. The proposal will involve the creation of new streets, which will be constructed to full local standards. Concise plans for street construction will undergo a public improvement review process by the city engineer before any streets are constructed. The applicant has submitted preliminary street plans as shown on sheet 3. There will be on-street parking spaces available within the subdivision. Stormwater drainage facilities will be constructed on tracks B and C. The proposed streets will result in temporary dead ends and will have turnarounds placed at the ends of them, so fire trucks will have the ability to turn around. The streets are preserved and can extend when Lot 27 is developed, and the streets will have reserve strips placed at the ends of them and will be under the ownership of the city, so the city will have control onto Lot 27. Next slide, please. Blocks and reserve strips. Block length standards for new local streets are a minimum of 400 feet and a maximum of 600 feet, unless topographic or environmental constraints are present. As seen on sheet 5, the main block containing lots 17 through 24 is 435 feet long. The block containing lots 15, 16, 25, and 26 is short of the 400-foot minimum. The presence of topographic constraints allow for an exception to minimum block length. Next slide, please. Sewer, water, and storm drainage. The city has the ability to serve all the proposed lots with city water and sewer service. Additionally, the applicant's civil engineer will be drafting concise plans to construct new stormwater facilities to be located on tracks B and C. Staff has confirmed with Public Works that the city will take over long-term ownership and maintenance responsibilities of these facilities once they are completed by the applicant. Next slide, please. Parkland dedication. The applicant will be required to meet the standard. The gross area of lots 1 to 26 is 316,555 square feet. 6% of this value is 18,993 square feet. As seen on sheet 1, the proposed parkland is 19,000 square feet, which is 7 feet more than required. Staff notes the applicant will again be required to meet this standard when the remainder of the property develops. Tract A meets the requirement for this application and will again apply when another subdivision application is submitted. The code does not allow for any carryover or offer a credit to future parkland developments. Tract A will become ownership of the city once dedicated. Next slide, please. I'd now like to move into the approval criteria required for subdivisions. Staff's findings for Commission's consideration will be presented as discussed in the staff report. The proposed tentative subdivision map has been found to meet the basic law standards of the underlying zoning designation as shown on sheet 1. The proposed subdivision will involve the creation of new streets within the subdivision. These streets will be constructed to full local standards as identified in the development code. The subject property contains topographic constraints due to its long and narrow shape. As such, the property falls short of meeting one of the minimum block lengths, but there is an exception to minimum block lengths for sites that contain topographic constraints. The applicant is providing the appropriate stormwater infrastructure as shown on tracks B and C, as well as the required parkland dedication in the form of tract A, which is 19,000 square feet, and will be dedicated to the city as future parkland. The proposed subdivision preserves the ability of Lot 27 to further subdivide and develop in the future. The existing and already developed lots immediately to the south of lots 8 through 14 will maintain their legal access. The proposed subdivision will not change any access ways to the lots located to the south of the subject property. Next slide, please. The proposed subdivision does abut the street that is under the jurisdiction of the city. The city engineer has recommended the applicant hire a qualified traffic engineer to prepare a traffic impact study. The applicant has submitted a traffic impact study, and the study has been reviewed by the city engineer. The study recommends prohibiting on-street parking in certain areas to accommodate site distance. As such, a condition of approval will be applied to the final plat that show a permanent no-build easement over lot 20 to accommodate line of sight for vehicles traveling within the proposed right-of-way. The easement shall prohibit structures, landscaping, and other obstructions above 30 inches in height when measured from the street. Next slide, please. The applicant will be providing city water and sewer service to each home site developed. The city has the capacity to provide such services to the proposed lots without detriment to existing service levels. Next slide, please. I'm going to grab a quick drink of water. The proposal includes the northerly extensions of Coleman and Emerald Streets and the westward extensions of Sarah and Macy Streets. The proposed extensions of the newly constructed streets are contemplated in Coburg's Transportation System Plan, which is the graphic you see on the slide. Full extension of Macy Street is not proposed or practical at this time because neither the city nor the applicant owns the property that would need to be acquired to make full extension possible. Lot 27 will remain as is and can further be subdivided in the future, but that is not expected to occur until additional access points into the subject property can be attained. The proposed subdivision does not preclude the extension of any known public access easements and where necessary allows for their appropriate continuation. Next slide, please. The applicant's civil engineer has submitted preliminary public improvement sheets for streets, utilities, easements, and stormwater management. Planning Commission can find the applicant can feasibly meet the city's engineering standards for public improvement. Prior to the authorization of construction activities, specific construction level public improvement plans will be submitted and reviewed by the city engineer as part of the public improvement review process. Next slide, please. Lot 27 is under the same ownership as the rest of the subject property. The proposed development on lots 1 through 26 will not impede future use of the remainder of the lot on lot 27. Lot 27 can be subdivided and can be served by public right-of-way in the future. Lot 27 faces access constraints and will likely not become developed until additional access points can be attained. The applicant has provided a conceptual shadow plat to show how future division of Lot 27 can occur. The lots located immediately to the south of proposed lots 8 through 14 are already developed and contain existing structures and access. Next slide, please. The subject property is not located within the flood zone, nor is it known to contain any geological hazards. From a fire safety point of view, the fire department will require a 20-foot unobstructed width on a portion of North Coleman as it enters a subdivision, south to the intersection with East Mill. A 20-foot unobstructed width can be attained on the segment of North Coleman by placing no parking on pavement signs on both sides of the street, and by increasing the total paved width to 20 feet, which is an additional 8 feet of paving. Parking of vehicles on streets is still permitted, just off pavement. This finding was created with the existence of the fire department. Next slide, please. Adequate water sewer drainage facilities are proposed as part of the subdivision. A small segment of the transportation system located off-site will need to be improved. North Coleman is presently paved to a width of 12 feet and contains 50 feet of right-of-way. The portion of North Coleman from where North Coleman will enter the subdivision, south to the intersection with East Mill, will need to be improved to a paved width of 20 feet from the current paved width of 12 feet. The Coburg Fire Department requires a travel surface of at least 16 feet with a total of 20 feet unobstructed width to allow for the safe passage of emergency vehicles in emergency situations. A 20-foot unobstructed width can be attained on this segment of North Coleman by placing no parking on pavement signs on both sides of the street. Parking of vehicles on street is still permitted, just off pavement. A paved width of 20 feet will also allow for two-way traffic travel, a 10-foot travel lane for vehicular traffic, and eliminate any on-street queuing or vehicles having to pull off for oncoming traffic. Next slide, please. The proposed subdivision is not hampering the provision of publicly owned spaces. Rather, the applicant is facilitating the further expansion of publicly owned spaces by publicly owned spaces for recreational needs by deeding Tract A to the city for future parkland developments. Next slide, please. The proposed subdivision is located near existing residential areas and is located on a parcel that is zoned and designated for future residential development. The proposed subdivision is located just north of the city's downtown core and commercial and retail shopping areas. The subject property will take access from North Coleman Street, which extends south to the intersection with East Pearl Street, providing quick and convenient access to Interstate 5. Lane Transit District provides bus service to Coburg, and the nearest bus stop is located 3.5 blocks south of the subject property, or about 1/4 mile away. Next slide, please. I'd now like to read the conditions of approval as recommended by staff. Condition of approval number 1, the design of the public streets and city utility infrastructure will be reviewed separately under a public improvement review process and is subject to the modifications as determined through that process. Connection points, detailed designs, and other detailed criteria will be subject to the public street design standards and applicable codes. Condition of approval number 2, prior to the issuance of building permits, the applicant shall submit a street tree plan for review and approval by the Public Works Director. Condition of approval number 3. Prior to final plat approval, the applicant shall submit to the city administrator for review and approval a final plat that shows all easements to be dedicated. Easements shall be placed in the right-of-way or in a 10-foot wide minimum wide easement. Next slide, please. Number 4. Prior to final plat approval, the applicant shall include on the final plat 4 reserve strips at the terminus of Macy, Sarah, Emerald, and Coleman Streets. Land comprising of the reserve strips shall be dedicated to the city of Coburg for control and access. Reserve strips shall remain in place until such time further development occurs on Lot 27 or on the lands north of the subject property. Number 5, prior to the issuance of building permits, the applicant shall submit to the Public Works Director plans for street names. Number 6, prior to final plat approval, the applicant shall submit a final plat to the city administrator for review and approval that shows tracks A, B, and C and all public rights-of-way to be dedicated on the final plat. Condition 7. The final plat shall include a permanent no-build easement over Lot 20 as seen on the applicant's tentative subdivision map dated December 1st, 2020, to accommodate line of sight for vehicles traveling within the proposed right-of-way. The easement shall prohibit structures, landscaping, and other site obstructions over 30 inches when measured from the street centerline elevation. This is a direct recommendation of the city engineer as found during his review of the applicant's materials. Condition approval number 8. Applicant shall pave North Coleman from the intersection at East Mill northward to the point where North Coleman enters the subdivision to a total width of 20 feet, including the existing pavement width. No parking on pavement signs shall be posted on both sides of North Coleman Street from the portion to be widened. Off-pavement parking of vehicles is permitted. Specific paving and signage plans to be presented to the city engineer as part of the public improvement review process. The last one, condition 9. Prior to final plat approval, the applicant shall furnish to the city administrator a performance agreement containing the required elements as contained in Article 12, Section E, 1 through 4. Staff does recommend approval, but Planning Commission should consider the comments and recommended conditions of approval submitted by the public tonight. Planning Commission can choose whether or not to accept staff's recommendation as contained in the staff report, impose additional conditions, or make their own revised findings, or deny the application based on denial findings that would need to be prepared. Next slide, please. Paul, I'm going to stop there. Why don't you go through the and open the public hearing, and then we can get back to these slides once we get to that point.
That sounds good, Henry, and I think I'm unmuted everywhere this time. So I am going to open the public hearing now on subdivision -02-20 before the City of Coburg Planning Commission. I again need to read a number of procedural points. State law requires decision makers to be impartial. Does any commissioner wish to make any disclosure or abstain from participating or voting on this application because you may gain financially as a result of this application? You own property within the area entitled to receive notice of this hearing. You have a direct private interest in the proposal, or because you have determined that you cannot be impartial. Hearing no one, does any commissioner need to declare any contact, written or otherwise, with the applicant or any other party involved in this hearing, or any other source of outside information regarding the subject of this hearing? Again, hearing none. Have any commissioners visited the site?
Yes.
I have.
And I also have.
I have also.
Okay. Does anyone present have an objection to the Coburg Planning Commission's jurisdiction or impartiality? Hearing none, we'll move on. We've had the staff report. The approval criteria were listed in the staff report. And just real quick before we open the testimony and I call the people or have Sammy call the people, are there any immediate questions of staff at this time? Okay, hearing none, we wish to hear from everyone who is interested in the proposal. Please wait until I or Sammy call on you to present testimony, then state your name and address for the record. In your testimony, you should address the applicable approval criteria or circumstances and state the facts around the issue. You must raise each issue with sufficient specificity to allow other parties to respond and to understand the nature of your concerns. If you do not raise an issue during this public hearing, you may not use that issue as the basis for an appeal. The applicant is allowed to speak first, and since the applicant has the burden of demonstrating by a preponderance of the evidence that the proposal should be approved, the applicant will be allowed to speak as needed. So, would the applicant or the applicant's representative please come forward and state why this application should be approved?
Hello, I'm Bruce Weichert. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Thank you. Oh, well, hello. My name is Bruce Weichert. I live at 3073 Skyview Lane, Eugene, Oregon. And of course, I think everyone is fairly familiar with this project. This was approved once before by the Planning Commission in its larger stage. And we withdrew that, as you're aware, and as Henry has described. And everything has been scaled back, taking into the concerns of the neighborhood and traffic concerns. So here we are with this smaller project at this time. So first of all, though, I wanted to thank all the city staff and the commissioners for their time. An extreme amount of time, energy, and resources has been put into this project by many people to ensure that every aspect has been thoroughly reviewed and designed to not only meet city code, but also to meet concerns of the neighborhood as well. And we've also been working cooperatively and in a very friendly manner with a group of the neighbors, and we've met with some of the neighbors individually as well to meet their concerns and try to make the project not only code compliant, but also fit their concerns as much as is possible. So as you can see, the project has been greatly scaled back from what was previously approved by the Planning Commission. And basically at the request of the neighborhood and based on concerns that they had. And secondly, a large central park that was an issue before the park was kind of strung out in some different areas. Now a large central park has been created. We've met with the Parks Committee. They particularly liked the large single block location of land located within the center of the development. A new additional traffic study has been performed by a certified traffic engineer, and it shows complete compliance. And I know traffic is always the biggest concern, always, no matter what you do, traffic is always the biggest concern. I think it's not as bad as people think, and the traffic study that has been reviewed by the city, by the city engineer, by the planning department, police department, et cetera, shows that the traffic will comply with the steps and conditions that are required with all safety and traffic concerns. Additionally, the plans have been thoroughly reviewed by several department members at Lane County and concerning traffic, a lot of it, and they approved it all. It's also been reviewed and approved by the City of Cobourg Police Department, the City of Cobourg Fire Department, the Public Works Department, the City of Cobourg Engineer, and Henry, the planning director, is recommending approval as well based on the design with the conditions as set forth. All these agencies and individuals are recommending approval of the project. I believe that we can build some very quality housing in Cobourg that the community can be extremely proud of. I would respectfully ask that the Commission approve this project this evening as set out in the staff report, recommending approval with the addition of the conditions of approval, numbers 10, 11, 12, and 13, as set out in the letter from Teresa Bischow, and she's representing several of the neighbors in the community. So we are in agreement with her. We're happy to meet those conditions as well. And that's all I have to say, and just thank you very much for your time and consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation and your request. Do any of the commissioners have any questions of the applicant at this time? Okay, hearing none, then I'm going to turn to Sammy and we will continue the public hearing, first asking if there are other people who wish to speak in favor of the proposal. Sammy?
And I do. I have Alan Wells.
Alan Wells, you have 3 minutes to speak. Please state your name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is Alan Wells. I live at 32668 East Locust Street. I should say Peggy, my wife, and I live there. I thought I was going to follow Teresa Bischow in the testimony, and I will defer to her to address the written testimony that we submitted. But just a couple quick points. Thank you, Bruce, for considering the conditions that we proposed in our written testimony, and thank you for accepting those. And I think you're going to do a great job in development of this property. I think you're going to build some nice homes, but with all due respect, the concerns that we had this last summer that we expressed to the city council, unfortunately have not been solved. The problems haven't gone away is with regards to access. It's still an issue. It's a problem that has to be resolved. Fortunately, you're not going to be building on the remainder of the property until those issues are resolved, but I think it's imperative that the Planning Commission and the City Council address access to this subdivision, the remaining part of this subdivision, and any subdivisions that might be approved in the future to the north, because we simply don't have enough access, and it's a problem that's unfortunately being kicked, the can is being kicked down the road. But again, thank you, Bruce, for at least accepting the conditions that we proposed. The real problem here, and it's been partially resolved in the fact that he's only building 26 homes as opposed to the 40 some odd that he had presented this summer, is that it's going to have impact on the city park. Even with the 26 lots that are being proposed, anyone wanting to head north in Coburg is going to go down Coleman Street, take a right on Mill Street, take a left on Diamond Street, and a left on Locust Street, and go right along the north part of the park. It's the only way to get north from Bruce's subdivision. And although 26 lots is certainly better than the 43 or 44 or whatever was presented this summer, it's still a problem, and it's still going to put a lot of pressure on traffic around the park, and it's going to create, unsafe conditions. And I guess I would ask that we all come together and consider how those issues in the future are going to be addressed, how access to future development in Coburg is going to be addressed. Not only for the remainder of Bruce's property, but for any property that might be brought into the city in the future north of Bruce's property. But that's for a different time and a future discussion. Again, thanks, Bruce, for accepting the conditions that we had proposed, and I wish you best of luck. I mean, there are a lot of neighbors that are going to speak up today that have concerns about the use of Coleman as the only access to the development, but as for the conditions that we propose, thank you for accepting those. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we go to the next speaker, I need to ask, does the commission have any questions of this speaker? All right, hearing none. Sammy, would you please call the next speaker in favor of the proposal?
And Paul, I need to say I made a mistake in calling that. We had nobody signed up tonight to speak in support of I had Alan and Teresa Bishop sign up as neutral. I missed that on there. So can we skip to
Okay,
that will be neutral testimony, and then Teresa Bishop will be behind Alan.
Teresa, please, then you are welcome to speak. State your name and address and 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Teresa Bishop. I live in South Eugene, and my mailing address is P.O. Box 50721, zip code 97405. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. I'll just touch upon a few points. First, we sincerely appreciate the changes reflected in the revised subdivision, especially the reduced number of new homes, as well as the identification of a suitable land for a park. We believe those are significant changes to the subdivision. Regarding condition of approval number 10, that relates to City of Coburg's Article 8 code, the street standards, and it essentially is expanding upon the staff recommended condition of approval number 4, which mentioned reserved strips at the end of public streets that were not yet extended. So we're asking for similar treatment at North Skinner Street as well as East Van Dunn adjacent to the property. Conditions number 11 and 12 reiterate or reinforce what we believed was the applicant's intent. And so it just helps clarify for the future that North Skinner Street is not to be extended to serve Lot 27. And I want to explain one of the fundamental reasons is that unlike Coleman Street, North Skinner does not have the sufficient existing public right-of-way to accommodate the street improvements to comply with the local street standards. So it's not only currently only 12 feet of pavement, but it's not physically possible to bring the street up to the adopted local street standards. So I just wanted to explain a little bit about why North Skinner is getting different treatment. Regarding condition of approval number 13 related to the park, we're excited that Tract A is identified. We are hopeful that as a planning commission, you will consider condition of approval 13 because it would allow a larger mini park, and I refer to mini park as these small parks. They're more expensive to design, construct, and maintain per square foot, the smaller park area. So having one larger 0.65 acre park will also not only be more cost effective for the city of Coburg, the ongoing maintenance, but also that size park, it allows you to do some different recreational amenities than two very small parks, which is the current concept plan. In our testimony, we do provide comments that access does need to be figured out prior to the development of Lot 27. But again, we appreciate the subdivider being willing to take a phased approach, giving the city, nearby property owners, and certainly the community of Coburg the opportunity to look at how to improve street access to allow
Teresa?
Development. So,
Teresa?
yes.
Excuse me, we're past 3 minutes. I need to ask you to wrap it.
That will conclude our testimony. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So at this time, does the commission have any questions of this speaker? Seeing none, Sammy, I believe we're in the neutral speaker realm. So are there any other speakers who are neutral to the proposal?
I have nobody indicating that they'd like to speak at this point. I did receive today, we have 2 written testimony in the neutral that were received today by email. Once we received them, they were sent directly to the planning commissioners and the applicant and posted on our city website. One letter was from Bishop Consulting, submitted as testimony on behalf of Alan Wells, Peggy Wells, and Andrew Hughes. The second was an email response to Bishop Consulting letter from Tony Farborough at the Farborough Group.
Thank you for noting those, Sammy. So those are now part of the record. And so, Sammy, I'll ask if there are any speakers signed up in opposition to the proposal.
I do. I have Kathy Ingebretson.
Kathy, if you're available, please speak, state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Kathy Ingebretson, and I live at 32703 East Locust Street. And really, I want to just provide some concerns that I'd like to hear the Planning Commission discuss, if possible, about the application. And as Teresa said, I certainly appreciate the addition of the park. A little positive first here. It's nice to see a proper neighborhood park in the application. So thanks for the applicant for listening to the community on that. And then as far as some concerns, I'm going to talk about access again. I think that the city needs to help try to work out a solution for access to the west of this property. Otherwise, as it stands right now, all traffic from this, as well as potential future developments to the north of this parcel, will funnel down one residential street. And that doesn't sit well, I guess. The City of Coburg Transportation System plans show expected access on the west side of the property of via Macy Street. I think the City of Coburg unfortunately made a mistake by allowing that right of way at the east terminus of that street to be purchased by private property owners. But any benefit that's provided to the properties on Macy Street is at the expense of properties on Coleman and the neighborhood south of the proposed subdivision. So there is an alternative route, I suppose, to the west that can be considered, a new east-west street situated to the north of the existing Macy Street neighborhood. Of course, the problem there is it's county land, and the county doesn't want to allow a road there simply to allow access to the city, especially because it's farmland. In the near term, though, maybe the applicant and city could work with the county to get an exception. They may be willing to do that. Also, this next point might upset some folks, and I don't mean any offense, but I do believe the right thing to do would be for the city to admit a mistake was made on the Macy right-of-way and purchase it back. There's been talk of structures in the way there, but we're talking about fences. There does seem to be a small shed that might encroach into possibly parking or pedestrian part of the right-of-way, but it doesn't look like it would obstruct the traffic lanes. So I don't think that's a reasonable reason to not consider this option. So beyond the access, there's a jog shown on Coleman Street right now. One of my concerns here, I don't want Coleman Street to become a racetrack. We don't want that to be a straight shot. There is, because, if future subdivisions come into the north, then, that can encourage even some cut through traffic potentially, as well as just a lot of fast driving down this street that we're already talking about adding a lot more traffic to. So I think the Planning Commission should talk about whether the jog that's shown there now, is that enough? Just food for thought. Also, I guess we're dropping the consideration of easements to tax lots 6903 and 7101 to the south of the parcel. At least one of the owners there had expressed concern that Van Dyne isn't there going through there anymore. So now they don't have as good of access to the back of their lots. And then, by the way, I think this is somewhat unrelated to the current application, but as Teresa alluded to, attempting to substitute Skinner Street instead of Macy Street as an alternate connection is not a fair one-for-one swap. We found out in digging through the details this summer, there are several objective characteristics of Skinner that are different from Macy that make it unsuitable. So I just want to point that out as well. And then
Kathy?
Finally, perhaps we should.
Kathy?
Yes, sir.
Excuse me, we have exceeded 3 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
I appreciate.
Looks like you're muted, Paul.
You're right. Sorry. So I'll ask again. Thanks, Sammy. Do any of the commissioners have any questions of this speaker before we move on? Thank you. So Sammy, is there another speaker in opposition?
Have nobody indicating that they'd like to add to the comments or to speak in opposition. I did receive, the city received 2 emails in opposition from Annalie Fuentes and Martin Weisberth, as well as Colleen Heaton today. The emails were also sent to the planning commissioners, the applicant, and posted on the city website.
All right, I'd like to ask before I move on to the next step, are there any other speakers present in opposition that would like to speak now? Seeing none, next step is asking the applicant, Mr. Weichert, if you wish to respond to any of the opposing testimony, either oral or written.
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of comments, just for maybe for clarification is all. I think that the land to the north of the subdivision is number one outside the urban growth boundary. And if so, it's not a case that future development there is going to cause more traffic because number one, it's prohibited right now. But number two, if in the future that is added on to the property or onto the city land, that strip of land then has access out to the west, which has been what's been highly desired by everybody, to have Macy go through or Van Doyne go through. So the question of all this additional building that will go to the north, the good part is if that were to happen at some point in the future, which, you know, when the urban growth boundary gets expanded, that might be a very moot question for a long time. But theoretically, if it does, that's why the city and the planners want the stub roads, that we need to provide the stub roads there. But if that does happen, then the very good news is there is access out to the west, and the piece of land that we own that the Planning Commission just approved the partition of, if you recall, that piece of land has access completely out to the west on its own. So if there is more development, I think that would actually be good because it could reduce the traffic on Coleman. And then one just final little point with the easement that Kathy mentioned, there was some owners to the south that were concerned about maintaining power lines and so on. So easements have been provided all along, and I think that shows up on your plat, but easements are provided all along the south portion of lots 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 for the power company to come in and maintain the power lines there. And that was worked out in coordination with Pacific Power as well, of how they wanted to be able to take access in there to maintain those power lines. So I think that issue has been taken care of too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So at this time, before I close the hearing, I'll ask if there's any other questions of the commissioners of the speakers. And again, seeing none. Henry, I think the last step before I close the hearing is you want to return to your slides and a summary of the evidence and recommendations and options.
Sure. Megan, will you pull that back up, please? So I will make a comment on some of the comments that I heard. It sounds like there are, I know there are issues with access, and behind the scenes, just after this past summer, after the previous application was withdrawn, the city did open up a line of communication with Lane County and DLCD to start that process of looking at a transportation goal exception to get a road through county land to access that property. Those talks have started, although an exception, as many of you know, will take some time. But I would just like to state that the city is working on that issue. Okay, we'll go to so I outlined some options regarding the hearing and the record. Let me just move this out of the way. So Planning Commission, you can close the hearing and the record and enter into deliberations and make a decision tonight. That is one option. You can also leave the record open if a request is made, or if you feel more time is needed for evidence to be submitted. In this case, we would establish open record periods and a date set for you to return and deliberate. In this case, Planning Commission should still close the public hearing. Can you scroll down, please? You can also continue the hearing tonight to a date certain. In this case, we essentially hold another public hearing just like we are tonight. Next slide, please. And with respect to a decision, if the hearing and the record are closed, you can make a motion to approve the subdivision as contained in the staff report. You can also make a motion to approve the application, but subject to Planning Commission's revised findings and/or conditions. In this case, Planning Commission would continue the hearing, but only for deliberations and for staff to draft findings in support of your decision. The record would still be closed in this case and no new evidence allowed. And also, you could make a motion to deny the application. In this case, Planning Commission would direct staff to draft findings in support of denial. The record will be closed, but the hearing continued, but only for staff to draft denial findings for your adoption.
Henry, can I stop you there and ask a question?
Yeah, please.
So if the commission chooses to move for approval, and if that motion for approval includes not only the conditions of approval in the staff report, but the 4 additional conditions of approval submitted by people that testified and apparently agreed to by the applicant, would that then fall under the second bullet to approve and continue the hearing, but only for those reasons?
It would. And Gary, you can chime in if you want to correct me on this. So what would essentially happen is you would make a motion to approve, but subject to revised findings and conditions that you would direct staff to write and come back to you at your next date, and you would adopt those findings at that time. In that case, the record would be closed and there would be no new evidence submitted. We would essentially just be adopting those revised conditions and incorporating them into the findings for you to adopt. And we would do that in a public setting.
And I understood that you wanted to make slight wording changes to perhaps 2 of those additional conditions, correct?
Yeah, we would likely do that if adopted. Yep.
Okay. Continue. Thanks, Henry.
That's all I have. And Gary and I are here just on standby with any process questions you may have. He and I can both help answer those.
All right. Well, I think the next step in the process is for me to ask the commission if there is any desire to continue the hearing, or can we close it at this time? And Henry or Megan, if you can stop sharing the screen so I can see everybody. Thanks. So,
hey, this is Will. I think that we should stop deliberation and close the hearing and come to a decision.
Okay, thank you for that. So, hearing that and no desire to continue the hearing, I will hereby close the public hearing for variance, subdivision 02-20. And now the commission can enter into discussion of the matter, or if somebody would like to make a motion, we are ready for that also.
And Paul, I'd also add, you want to clarify if you're leaving the record open or closed right now as well.
I'm sorry, I believe you're right. So just to clarify that point.
I have a couple of questions, Paul. Number one, what is the status now of lot 27 in regards to I believe Henry mentioned that it's going to go back to farmland, or would be farmland. Is that correct?
To my understanding and my knowledge, lot 27 is just open, vacant farmland, and it will remain that.
Okay, but it lies within the city and subject to city rules, codes and everything else regarding maintenance of the property?
I can't, I don't, I'm not, I don't think I have the level of knowledge to speak to maintaining property in the city, but I can tell you that the entire property is within city limits. So
okay.
I guess if Paul, if maybe the owner could clarify that question. I don't have a good answer for you on that. All I can tell you is lot 27 is within city limits, and it is vacant farmland currently and will remain.
And then, Henry, to address the concerns brought up tonight, as well as I think in an email, about the traffic on Coleman and speed, how does that handle in regards to additional traffic controls? Is that handled after we get the process going and there's evidence that we need traffic controls? I'm not sure how you go forward with that.
What I can tell you is I would rely on the TIA that was done and reviewed by the city. The level of traffic expected is fairly low for that amount of homes. And there were in the TIA, there were no recommendations for any like traffic calming measures. So all I can point to is what was found in the TIA.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. And Henry, I'd like to just take a quick moment to also formally close the record. I don't believe I had heard from the commissioners any desire to continue the record, so consider the record also closed as well as the hearing. Thank you for reminding me of that. Are there any other comments or discussion by the commission or anybody that wishes to make a motion?
Yeah, I have a comment, and I think we should discuss that Coleman now is the only access to 26 tracts of potential housing. Currently, I live on East Mackenzie, 2 houses down from Coleman Street, and there has been, and it has been brought up to City Council that people do run that stop sign on East Mackenzie. And as you know, East Mackenzie does go into the Hayden Homes. So at that one intersection, there's traffic from Hayden Homes, and people off of Coleman Street that live off that street drive down that street and have been known to run that stop sign. Like I said, I brought up to City Council a few months back. I think it was a year ago. And I just want to make that point clear that that is a potential for something to happen at that corner. So I just want to make sure that the city is aware that that is a problem. So, and I think they do know that it is a problem. And, you know, that is my concern.
Thank you. And actually, I'd like to ask Ann, if it's appropriate, and please tell me if it's not, but Ann Heath, do you want to say anything to that, and in particular to any possible addressing of street issues or traffic issues or speed issues in the ad hoc committee, and or what I know is the city's work on perhaps trying to lower speed limits on some of these streets?
Yeah, we have actually already lowered speed limits on a couple streets, but we are looking at other streets. It's not as easy process as you think, but we are working on it. And so our police department is aware, our public works department is aware, and they are looking at some traffic devices or just calming to put on some of those streets.
And does that include Coleman?
Coleman is tough because Coleman is a collector. And so that when I say it's not as easy as you think, a collector street, it's going to be harder to lower the speed limit. You might be able to in certain areas, but it's a little bit harder when it's a collector.
can you put in like a four-way stop sign at a couple intersections?
You might be able to. I would not be, that would be a question for our engineer.
Yeah,
You can
okay.
They are.
Certainly answer that question, ask that question. I am not in the position to answer it.
That's fine. Okay, thank you.
I know Mackenzie and Coleman, that intersection is a four-way stop. And like I said, down Coleman Street, someone always runs it. So I've taught my kids to just not cross that street. So it's just the way it is.
Thank you, Commissioner Doyle. And I'm just going to add, I live at the corner of Coleman and East Mill, so four-way stop also, but I am frequently viewing people out my front window who are not stopping, or a very aggressive rolling stop, if you will. There is unfortunately not much that can be done beyond the four-way stop other than increased enforcement. And I do know from conversations that the city's aware of the problem and the police department's aware of the problem. And I hope that they can lower speeds and perhaps post more signage. Are there other commissioners that wish to speak to this? And again, I'd be happy to entertain a motion. And Henry has laid out the options for that.
Paul, I'll go ahead and make the motion that to approve or recommend approval, including the conditions as outlined by staff and the additional conditions as supplied by the, I believe that brought into testimony tonight. Not sure where to take it from there in regards to have it come back with staff. I'm not sure how to add that into the motion.
So you would essentially be making the motion to approve with the additional conditions as presented for the testimony of Teresa Bischow, and you would direct staff to come back. I would probably think at your February meeting, we would present those findings to you, and you would adopt them officially at that meeting. So essentially, if you approved, the applicant would have essentially an approval, just subject to those formal findings being adopted, which will be revised to include those conditions.
Okay, I so move.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
So we have a motion by Commissioner Marshall, seconded by Commissioner Wood, to approve subdivision -02-20, subject to the staff findings and conditions of approval, and subject to staff presenting to the Planning Commission the 4 additional conditions of approval that were entered into testimony tonight. I hope I've restated that correctly. Is there discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'm going to ask for the vote. Please, all those in favor say aye.
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 And I'll say aye. I appreciate Commissioner Doyle's aye, especially. And are there any opposed? Hearing none, I believe we have 5 votes in favor and it is unanimous. Again, the Planning Commission decision may be appealed to the City Council within 14 days of the date of the notice of decision being mailed. Staff will mail notice of this decision within 5 days of a decision being made. Having said that, Henry, can I ask, is that 14 days, I presume, start now? It's not subject to when you bring back those new conditions?
It's a very good question, Paul. Gary, do you want to chime in there? Is he on the line?
Can you hear me now?
There he is.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Gary.
What was the exact question again?
Gary, I was curious because we just approved a motion, unanimously approved the motion to approve the subdivision application. And I read off that it may be appealed within 14 days, but we're also approved it subject to staff bringing back the 4 new conditions of approval for
Right.
final
The
approval
approval-
in probably February.
Right, the approval doesn't, clock doesn't start until you formally approve the findings and your decision.
Okay, so scratch everything I said about the 14 days starting now. That'll start when we take the next action.
Correct.
Is that right, Gary? So the notice of decision will be mailed once they adopt the findings, and then the appeal clock will start after that, when the notice of decision is mailed in February, likely.
That's correct.
Okay.
The commission needs to see both the findings and the approval document in final form and approve those, and that starts the appeal clock.
Okay. And Gary, also, I know you and I discussed earlier about this situation. I guess Paul did officially close the public hearing, but you had mentioned if this case happens, we should actually continue the public hearing just for staff to present those findings, but there's no new additional testimony or evidence, and the record is closed.
Right, you're continuing the hearing for deliberations.
Okay, so Paul, maybe you just want to state you're continuing the hearing for deliberations only.
Right. Now, it's my understanding that the only thing that's being changed from staff's findings are the addition of the conditions. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And we know the exact language of the conditions?
They have been proposed by Ms. Fischow. Staff has pointed out several maybe addition or deletion of words, but those conditions in their substantial form will be included.
Okay. I was just thinking if you were going to adopt them verbatim without changes, you could make that final decision now, subject to the Planning Commission chair signing the decision when staff has finished the work. But that's not the case. So
no, Gary, I understood Henry to say that there were a couple of wording changes fairly minor to at least 2 of the new conditions.
right. So that means they'll have to come out back before the commission for final approval.
Yep. And the substance of those conditions will not change. That's the important thing to remember.
Right.
Yep.
Understood. So I'd like to clarify at this time that earlier I closed the public hearing for testimony, but we are continuing the hearing for deliberation only pending the commission having the final form of the conditions of approval.
Right.
And you may also want to clarify the record is closed and no new additional evidence or testimony is permitted.
And I will, I think, restate that the record is closed and no new testimony or evidence is allowed at this time. Thank you, Henry.
And could you also continue it to the date and time certain?
Thank you, Gary. Yes, Paul, we should do that now. I know it's a little on the fly. So your February Planning Commission hearing meeting would be, is that February 16th or 17th? Megan Ann, maybe you can help me out. Sammy?
The only reason I hadn't done that, Gary, is because Henry had been saying presumably February, and so is that definitely?
Well,
it would be the 17th.
Be the 17th.
It is
Okay.
the 17th, yes, sorry.
This allows you not to have to send out any additional notice as long as you indicate that you're continuing it to a date and a time certain.
And the
I guess
commission
I
is not
should back-
meeting I'm sorry, is the commission meeting in January?
I should back up. Yes, they are. So we should probably start with January.
I would then say, just again, trying to clarify all these procedural points, that we have continued the hearing for deliberation until 7 p.m. on January 20th, at the next commission meeting. Is that sufficient, Gary?
Yes.
Okay, January 20th it is. Yep.
Thank you both for helping me through that. So I believe that is the conclusion of agenda item number 7. Am I correct on that, everybody? I'm going to take that as yes. So we'll move on to number 8, city updates, and I think that's Ann.
Well, good evening. That was very well done, guys. That was a lot of work. Good job, Paul, on your first meeting with some pretty tough agenda items. In the city, I just wanted to update. City Hall remains closed due to governor's guidelines, but we are working. Most staff is splitting their time between the office and home. We are available to meet with people as needed. We can make appointments, holding a lot of Zoom meetings, but we are getting the work done. There's a lot of projects that are happening right now. And one is, just to clarify what Henry said, is we are working with the regional solutions team to look at that transportation issue. And that is, we're dedicated to working out that problem. The mayor is working very hard on that. It has been made a priority. And so I feel like in the new year, we're going to be able to move forward and try and start solving that problem. The water project is moving ahead. We do have a bore under the I-5 completed. That doesn't mean that water's going through the pipes, but the bore is there. We completed the purchase of the property on Stallings Lane for the 3rd water well, and that is now the property of the city. So right now we'll be seeing a whole lot of engineering design going on, not much visual things going on in the water project for a few months. It will mostly be design. We are working on the design of the water line going up to the reservoir on the east side at this time. Let's see. We are working at moving with the chamber into a Main Streets program that we are working on several city projects, different projects as a community, several committees. So that will be taking place in the new year, really getting kicked off. So you'll see more information on that in the newsletter. Johnny Diamond Park is completed, and we're very excited to open that up. And I've been seeing a lot of people in it, enjoying the park. Part of the Stallings Lane property for the 3rd well includes 1 acre of parkland that's set aside for dedicated to Julia Murnau and to the historic agricultural heritage of Coburg. So it'll be interesting to see what the Heritage Committee and the Park Committee come up with for how we develop that park. The park is around the home and the gardens around the home. So I think it's going to lend itself to a really unique park for the community. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has about things that are going on in the community.
And I guess the only thing I would reiterate, because you did address it earlier, is a reminder about the ad hoc committee that's going to be looking at all of the codes, or not all of them, but a selection of code, and perhaps through that process we'll be creating things that come to the Planning Commission.
Yeah, that will be come before the City Council in January at their January meeting. So I would say that ad hoc committee is going to get off to a start right away in the new year.
All right. If that's it, thank you, Anne. And I'm going to make one call for any other business comments, input that we need. And hearing none, we're only 9 minutes past when the agenda said we were going to adjourn, so I'll take that as a win. Thank you, everyone. I think I'm going to adjourn the meeting of the Planning Commission. We're done.
Thank you, Paul.